Now we are going to look ahead to the playoffs. We already talked about the 4-5 matchups on our last show. You can go ahead and watch those full playoff previews. Today we're going to be talking about the 3-6 matchups. And Logan, we'll start out west. I think this is probably the most interesting series in the playoffs to me. Hot take. It feels like Dallas, LA has been the choice, and maybe it's just we've already talked about that one enough that I've kind of moved past it. But I think in terms of stylistic contrast and the specifics of the matchup, this is a really, really juicy one. Suns-Timberwolves. What's the first key that stands out to you in this one?
Man, you took the words out of my mouth. That was going to be my opener, stylistical contrast. It is so weird to see two teams that have distinct, different ways of playing their brand of winning basketball, right? Minnesota is a win first on defense, get out in transition, grind teams down, and win that way. And Phoenix is, we're going to get into the mid-range and we're just going to cook, man. We're going to light it up offensively. We're not going to miss. I don't know what to do with this series. I'm befuddled, to be frank with you, Carson. My first question is just, will the Suns just kill Minnesota in the mid-range with pull-up shooting? Like, they just got Minnesota to move defensively, like in their regular season matchups, man. I think Minnesota matches up really physically well with Phoenix, but I worry about Gobert having to defend in space. I worry about them dragging him out of the paint and making him uncomfortable. Dude, Rudy Gobert was a player worst, and every player that played in this regular season series, negative 68 in his minutes. That was worst of any player that was on the floor for Minnesota and for Phoenix. And, I mean, the Suns dominated the regular season matchups, 3-0. Now, one game was at the end of the regular season, didn't really matter. Like, Minnesota punted. It wasn't like a meaningful game for them. But they won the first two matchups, 133-115, and they won the other one 97-87. The real question is, does Phoenix have the two best offensive players in this series? Are Kevin Durant and Devin Booker just going to...
Is that a question?
Well,
I don't think that's the question.
I think
the question is that enough to swing it?
I mean, I think it depends on what you think of Anthony Edwards. I think they are the two best offensive players in the series. And, I mean, we saw it against Denver, right? I think Denver's a really good comparison for how Minnesota matches up. Now, I think Minnesota's a better defense than Denver, but in terms of size and physicality, like, KD and D-Book just decided they weren't going to miss for a couple of games, and they sold 2 games from Denver. And if they do that against Minnesota, it's like, is that enough? Because there is a world in which I see Minnesota's offense grinding to a standstill, where Anthony Edwards has to settle or does settle, because that's still a bad tendency of Anthony Edwards. I don't think anybody on Phoenix can hold Ant. I think Ant is going to be able to get downhill at will if he wants. And so my thing is, how consistently does Anthony Edwards want to get to the rack, and how much does he weaponize his playmaking in this matchup to kill Phoenix? Because in the regular season matchups, when Ant wanted to get to the rim, he did. It was just a matter of, was he making his layups and was he going to kick out? He didn't kick out a whole lot. And 2, he settled for a lot of pull-up J's where I'm like, Ant, stop. So how much is Ant going to knock down his pull-up jumper? How much is he going to decide to take his pull-up jumper? How much is he going to kick out? I mean, I guess that's the question that I'm getting at is, can Anthony Edwards be the superstar, superhuman offensive engine that the Minnesota Timberwolves need him to be? To me, this is going to be a star-breaking or a star-breaking performance. And I just mean that in terms of how the media is going to take... I know what Anthony Edwards is. I know what I believe in Anthony Edwards to be. I know what I think he's going to be in the future. I think Anthony Edwards is going to be one of the handful of the best players on planet Earth. But because this is his first time on a big stage where the Timberwolves really achieved highly in the regular season, he is the face of the franchise. For Paolo Banchero, he's in the same boat with Orlando, right? This is going to decide his narrative. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. There's a lot of first-time stars on the big stage. This is going to determine the narrative for Ant moving forward. And his play is probably going to swing, offensively going to swing what Minnesota can do. And on the other side, Phoenix has good options. Like, if they stick KD on him, KD's a long defender where he can try to stay in front of him. I don't think anybody can, but it's going to be about trying to force him to settle for those pull-up jumpers and trying to deter him. It's also about Cat pulling his weight offensively. But that's the biggest key to me, man, is what Anthony Edwards does offensively and how he decides to play his game. Again, I think the best version of Ant in this series is one that relentlessly is attacking downhill, trying to draw fouls, trying to take shots at the rim, and kicking out. Ant commands a lot of attention, and there is enough requisite shooting on the wings where I think he can punish a bad Phoenix defense. Ant's got a lot on his shoulders in this series, but I believe in the kid.
Of course, Ant has been on this stage before, and he's performed really well, but he's never been in a moment like this where you're expected to win. And so that's a different dynamic. I don't think Phoenix has a guy who can stay in front of Ant. KD, to me, yes, of course he has the length, but I just don't think he has the quickness. I also think, Ant just physically can overpower him on some drives, but I think more often he's just going to get by him if that's the primary matchup. And I also think the more that you can pull KD out and not have him be involved as a helper, that's a net positive for the Timberwolves offense as well. To me, Royce O'Neal is the best option on this roster just because he has the build as a compact point of attack defender who can match Ant's strength as a driver, but he can't quite match the quickness. So I think Ant is a really problematic matchup for the Suns, and I do think he has an opportunity to pressure the hell out of the rim. I also think he has to play make well. That is what is going to be most tested for Ant in this series because Phoenix is going to make him beat them like that. And I don't know if it's necessarily going to be a bunch of traps or whatnot, but it's going to be helping aggressively on Anthony Edwards' drives, and he just has to be able to make the necessary passes to create good offense for his team when they converge, and Minnesota does have good enough shooting to hold them to account. So I absolutely think the level that he can rise to is essential because Phoenix does have the two best offensive players in this series, but Minnesota has the best athlete. They have the guy who can impose himself physically on the game in a way that those other two cannot. And ultimately, it's going to be a question of how much can Minnesota slow Phoenix down, and then how much can Minnesota leverage their physical advantages offensively to produce enough there to ultimately win out. And that's where I think Cat is the most important player in this series. Ant, obviously, just as the Timberwolves offensive number one, a team that is sort of fighting an uphill battle in terms of offensive skill is extremely important. But Cat is the guy who, on both sides of the ball, is absolutely essential in this series because offensively, he is always going to be working with a physical advantage. The Suns have nobody who can physically match up and guard him because obviously Nurk is going to be on Gobert, and even if Nurk were on him, he couldn't really step out there in space. Cat's a 40+% high volume 3-point shooter. And we've sort of seen multiple versions of Cat across the two regular season matchups that he did take place in this year between these two teams. They met in November. He came out super aggressive, and they just straight up could not deal with his combination of size, strength, and skill. He was getting what he wanted. In their recent game, their game in the last day of the regular season, he was settling more for tough runners. He was turning the ball over. You just can't have that version of Cat. You need good Cat. And specifically, I want to see him fighting for position on the interior and attacking as a post-up player, back to the basket and face-ups, but getting that position early because too often Cat, when he initiates from the perimeter, just gets caught up on these drives and he'll commit an offensive foul or he'll pick up his dribble too soon and he'll take a tough runner. I want him in the teeth of the defense when he catches the ball because that's where I think they just won't have answers for him. And maybe that's not the best for spacing because you have both him and Gobert down there, but I trust Cat's passing enough, his interior passing, his ability to kick out to shooters, to where I just think put yourself in the best position to impose yourself physically. And I do think he has to play make well in this series too, and the Timberwolves have to knock down shots. When Cat has been doubled on post-ups this year, the Timberwolves have averaged 0.67 points per post-up. That is absolutely awful. That's 7th percentile. But historically, that has not been the case, and I don't think that's a Cat playmaking issue. He's not perfect there. He can get overwhelmed at times, but mostly he makes the right decision. He's a pretty good passing big, And over the years, like they've generally produced at the same level when he passes out of those double teams as when you just deal with him in single coverage. So he is vital offensively. I also think he has an opportunity to attack the glass, but he just has to bully Phoenix. He has to bully Phoenix, and he has to make them pay for the fact consistently that they are basically compromising size for this tremendous offensive skill that they have. And that's where defensively, he is going to be a target consistently. Minnesota has an amazing defense. We've raved about it. But against a team like Phoenix that is so perimeter skill-based, has so many great pull-up shooters and shooters off the catch, they are going to target the fact that Minnesota is going to have two bigs on the floor basically at all times, and especially going to target Cat in space. So he has to guard a number of really dangerous offensive players out there. And primarily that's probably going to be Grayson Allen. That is not ideal. Like, he's not the same threat off the bounce that the others guys are, of course, but he's a 46% three-point shooter. And chasing him around screens, dealing with these guard-on-guard screens where then he has to hedge because you can't allow a good pull-up look to whoever it is, Devin Booker running the pick and roll. And then he's got to quickly recover to Grayson Allen. I thought he did an okay job of that, but it's just a big burden, and he's a little bit lumbering in space, and you're asking a lot of him to be consistently dialed in there because I think Phoenix is going to make him work on that side of the ball. And I think his key objective has to be basically run these dudes off the three-point line, especially Grayson Allen, just because he's not the same threat as like a mid-range pull-up shooter, just as a ball handler overall. Run him off the three-point line because ultimately, it's not like you're going to get a lot of perfect Cat closeouts and then he stays on him perfectly in space, right? He just doesn't have that sort of quickness and agility. Take away the 46% three-point shooter, funnel him into Rudy Gobert. That, to me, is a really important job for Cat in this series. And I don't know if we'll see at some point, like, him matched up with Nurk, and then you put Gobert on a perimeter player just so you can't expose Cat in that same way. I think ultimately you need Gobert as your primary rim protector and interior defender, and that's the combination. But Cat has to hang in defensively. He has to play his ass off. Like, he just has to consistently be super high effort there in space, and then he has to give them back more than he's giving up, because he's going to give up points in space. That's part of what makes this matchup so scary for Minnesota, is that lethal perimeter skill against a too big look. But I ultimately think Cat really can bully the Suns. He can bully the Suns. He has a bunch of favorable matchups, and I think he does have the ability to give them back more than he's giving up.
Yeah, I think Cat and Gobert are just both interesting defenders to look at in general here in this matchup, man. I mean, even like with Nurk, high pick and roll, like, they're just so different. They're just such different basketball teams, and ironically, like, Nurk matches up well, I think, with Gobert on the interior.
Interesting. I mean, know that I totally agree.
I'm just talking about on the glass and, like, in terms of size. Like, I think he can move Rudy around.
Offensively or defensively?
I mean, just on the glass. Like, they're just huge. Like, Nurk's just a big body where I think he can push Gobert
match up
around.
On the glass. I think Gobert has a pretty clear opportunity to expose his lack of verticality, and that's where I think you saw him have a lot of success in this last matchup. Ant gets penetration, you go over the top to Gobert. Like, Nurk just can't quite contest those.
Yeah, I'm trying to get those guys involved in as many actions as possible on ball, and I'm trying to keep Ant and McDaniels.
You're including Gobert in that?
Yeah, I mean, I want those guys in space. I want to get Gobert and Cat in space, and after that, it's like, we'll figure out the rest. Like, I want the and that's what Phoenix was really good at doing, is getting Minnesota in rotation and getting Minnesota out of sorts defensively. Like, I'm just trying to get away from McDaniels and Ant as much as possible on the perimeter and attacking both of those guys with KD, with Beal. But it is a real stylistical contrast, and the interesting thing about Phoenix, as always, is you live by the pull-up jumper, you die by the pull-up jumper, and that's what's so interesting about this series, too, is Minnesota could play a perfect series, and they could be red hot from the mid-range, and the Suns could walk them off the court. Or the Timberwolves could have a bad defensive series, but the Suns' mid-range and pull-up jumpers leave them. and somehow the Timberwolves eke it out. There's a lot of different ways I could see this series going. The thing that still scares me about Phoenix is I've harped on many a time the reason that they were not on my top 10 contenders list. We discussed this on Jason's show as well when we disagreed about the ceiling for the Suns and the Timberwolves. Suns have been bad all year long in the fourth quarter and in big moments. I read off these stats on Jason's show. They have a offensive rating of 104.1 in the fourth quarter. That is dead last among all NBA teams. They have a defensive rating of 116.6. That's 22nd among NBA teams. They have the worst net rating among all NBA teams in the fourth quarter, negative 12.5. And they have the second worst turnover percentage, 16.2. Clutch offense, 23rd. Clutch net rating, 19th. Like, in the big moments, I know they've got the personnel. KD, D-Book, Beal. They have been a bad fourth quarter and clutch team. And I think that's due to a couple reasons. I think it's, one, just the hierarchy thing. Again, there's just moments where the role players try to do too much. Allen, Eric Gordon. I think there's also, like, not a star hierarchy, like, where it's like, and they're not super cohesive. Like, it's like, oh, KD's going to take this possession. Beal's going to take this possession. Book's going to take this possession. It's not like all of the pieces working together and moving off ball or finding an open shot. It's like, all right, hey, Book, this is your isolation possession. KD, this is your isolation possession. Let's figure it out. And then, two, I think it speaks to there's not a good defense. They're not good at stopping runs. You know, and so it's hard to stop the bleeding sometimes if you're Phoenix. That's what scared me off of Phoenix. And that's honestly what scares me off of them in this matchup, man. I went back and forth with this one, and again, I think there's a wide range of outcomes in this series. I like Minnesota's formula more. I think Anthony Edwards is going to be able to consistently get downhill. I think his pull-up jumper has to be going. I think he has to play make well, but he's a gamer, and I trust him. I think Karl-Anthony Towns, like you said, has to pull his weight. But the T-Wolves have more players that I like. I prefer their recipe, their win-first on defense approach, and I think they're super big and physical, and they can make Phoenix a little uncomfortable. So I'm going to take the Timberwolves in 7.
The clutch execution point is obviously a fair one about Phoenix because they have been awful there. The thing is, Minnesota has also been a really bad clutch team. They're 27th in clutch net rating, and we have seen some of the issues just in terms of their lack of that, like, automatic half-court shot creator bog them down in those spots. So I don't know that that's as much of a needle mover for me in this matchup as it might be with Phoenix against some other team. Like, ultimately, your process can be bad. I still might just rather have the guys who can get me a great shot in those spots. And I do think there's some problems that Phoenix poses as a matchup with Minnesota here. First of all, Phoenix swept the regular season series. When Cat played, they won both games in blowouts. Now, they also shot 55% from three in both of those games, and the Game 82 matchup was just, like, so weird. The T-Wolves turned the ball over 24 times, and there were some dumb ones, too, where you're just like, what happened here? Like, Naz Reid is cutting baseline, and he steps out of bounds, and, like, a ball that is deflected off of two Suns just hits him when he's standing out of bounds. Like, every single bounce went Phoenix's way. That was a weird game, but you did see that it is a scary matchup because of how much they demand Cat to guard in space, because of the fact that even though I think Gobert's ability to guard in space is often misunderstood, what I think is true is that the teams that are best built to counter Gobert are the teams that can kill you without having to challenge him at the rim. It's not that he can't guard in space. He guards well in space. It's that if you are pulling him out into space, you are taking away what he does best, which is being this all-time great rim protector. Or if you can just avoid having to challenge him at the rim because you're like the best pull-up shooting team from mid-range and beyond the arc in the league, well, that's a good counter to him as well. And, like, those are the realities for the Suns. They have big-time shot makers who, by design, like, don't pressure the rim super effectively. They drive and kick well, but they can kill you with those 10 to 15 footers as much as anybody out there. I also think Bradley Beal is a real problem. Like, the fact that the Suns are going to have the two best offensive players on the floor, probably, to me, like, that's a big factor. It's rare that I pick against the team in a series when they have that factor. But his quickness is also a unique challenge here. And The Timberwolves are like built to guard basically everybody in the league because they have elite rim protector. They're huge. They have 2 awesome point of attack defenders. Nobody is built to guard a team that has 3 awesome perimeter players, like 3 star perimeter players. And that's where it's like Conley on Bradley Beal is not ideal. There is just a quickness advantage there. And you saw that Beal exploded in the last game that they played. And so I wonder how important Nickeil Alexander-Walker becomes just because he is that awesome point of attack defender and really good shooter, solid playmaker. But you are losing then one of your best half-court creators offensively and a guy who just very much like sets the tone. And in these playoff environments too, I want just as like a guy to control the pace, right? To make good decisions because I don't want Ant being like the only perimeter decision maker. That's a crazy burden on him. So those are the concerns for me and why I think this is going to be a hell of a series. Because I don't think Phoenix is as good of a basketball team as Minnesota, but they have such a clear offensive skill advantage. And they're just kind of built to attack this defense pretty effectively. This defense that has a whole lot of answers for just about everybody. That being said, I do still think this is a really, really good Minnesota defense. And I don't want to overlook the fact that these are the best matchups that Cat and honestly, I would say Ant too can like reasonably expect in the playoff field. I think both those guys have the potential to explode. I think Gobert also, as I mentioned, over the top. And whenever Nurk is not on the floor, he can bully whoever is at the 5. And we saw that. This is something that I tweeted about last week. Gobert, historically, like against the Clippers, for example, that team could go 5 out and he just wasn't physical and aggressive enough out of the post to even punish them with his offense. He has been much more effective as a post-up player this year. And it's not because of skill. It's just because it's like when he has those mismatches, he's actually going at them and he's being physical. And so he's been an efficient post-up player and he's posting up way more. So in those non-Nurk minutes, he's going to have real physical advantages. And I'm going to bank on that. I'm going to bank on that with Minnesota having home court, having more quality players. Like it requires Ant and Cat both delivering probably. And ultimately, Ant, although he has stepped up to these moments, just like isn't the most proven half-court decision maker compared to some of these other guys. And his pull-up shooting can go red hot, but he was one of like the handful of least efficient volume pull-up shooters in the league. Cat, you just kind of never know, man. You just kind of never know what version of Cat you're going to get. But even though these regular season matchups like strongly favored the Suns, I really think that physicality advantage, just the fact that like the stars for the Timberwolves are so much bigger and they have these physical advantages, I'm going to bet on them grinding out enough offense and succeeding there much more than we're used to seeing this Minnesota team succeed. So I'm taking them in 7. I'm conflicted about it. I don't think they have the best answers for Phoenix defensively, especially compared to the answers that they have for basically everybody else defensively. I also don't think that Phoenix has answers for Minnesota, and I think Minnesota has an opportunity for a rarely good offensive series for them. So I'm going T-Wolves in 7. What's your official pick here?
Yeah, I said it. I'm kind of surprised we agree. Timberwolves in 7.
Okay, there we go. You didn't think we would agree? Did you think I was going to take the Suns, or did you think...
I did think you were going to take Phoenix. I say that as I'm wearing a Suns play-in shirt.
Dude, I really thought about it, man. It's scary. Like, I can see certainly a world in which Minnesota just doesn't produce good enough offense in the half court, and Cat's shot making is off, and then it's like Book and KD are going to get theirs, and Beal is a problematic matchup.
I'm going to ask you one more thing, and then we'll move on to the next series. I agree that I think Anthony Edwards and Cat pulling their weight is probably the biggest question mark offensively. This has been something that I know a lot of NBA fans have said, too. Is there any way in which, like, you think Gobert could get played off the court in this matchup?
No, not at all. The Suns, to me, can play like their small ball configuration in stretches with KD at the 5, and it's pretty lethal offensively. But I think you're getting punished on the other side. Like, I think Gobert is able to go over the top consistently against those looks, and also, like I said, like he will get down to the post and he will get dirtier than previously he has been willing to. And also, Cat is going to be a problem there. And for the most part, the Suns just have to play Nurk. Like, they just don't have another good 5. And you're not playing KD at the 5 for 25 minutes a night, right? You're doing that for maybe 8-10 minutes a night. And you're trying to catch them off guard with a different look and get a run going with your offense. Gobert's not getting played off the floor in this series. I think people misunderstand his defensive skill set. What I've realized, I came to this realization today actually, people think that Rudy Gobert is Brook Lopez defensively. Like they do. People think that he is literally just sit and drop, protect the rim. That's all he can do. You get him in space and it's, oh my God, look at this guy. He's going to fall over his own legs and trip and ha ha ha. We'll all point at him and laugh. And it's like, he's just not. The reason that you could go small against Utah back in the day was because he wouldn't punish you with his offense. And their defensive issues were really all about the fact that they were just bad at the point of attack. Everybody around him was bad. I'm not the biggest Gobert guy. I'm definitely not, but I do think his defense is what gets overly criticized. Like, the guy's a pretty awesome defender. I would take Anthony Davis over him, but Rudy is all-time rim protector who also guards well in space. Like, he's one of the best defenders that we've ever seen.